Well, YouTube showed me what was what. YouTube spanked me on the butt right there. YouTube worked my little ass into shape, which really sucks. I hate to get spanked on the internet, but I definitely just got spanked on the internet. That was low-key embarrassing.
This is once again going to be my 5th time trying to upload this video, so I'm going to say some really pleasant things at the top to see if I can skirt the censorship and deletion. Puppies, rainbows, cupcakes, delicious desserts, sweet tea, smiley faces, cotton candy, butterflies, and yeah, hopefully that works. As you guys might know, I've been censored pretty heavily lately on TikTok. They almost deleted my account multiple times. I've been given completely false strikes. I can do a whole video on that. Same thing on Instagram and Facebook. So they have been coming after me, or just really the topic of Epstein in general. It's pretty wild, but hopefully...
Wait, where's the video stop?
This is once again going to be my 5th time trying to upload this video, so I'm going to say some really pleasant things at the top to see if I can skirt the censorship and deletion. Puppies, rainbows, cupcakes, delicious desserts, sweet tea, one of the most credible seen in general. It's pretty wild, but I'm hoping that this throws it off a little bit, because this is one of the most important things that I've seen / found in the files.
Well,
yeah, let's get into this. Hopefully this worked. Today we're going to be going over what I believe to be the most credible tip sheet in all of the Epstein files, at least one of the most credible tip sheets. And it's really, really shocking. And it's really damning for people like Donald Trump who are implicated in this, because there was information presented in this tip that, I don't know, it goes beyond stuff that was public knowledge. Let me just read this to you and then we'll go over this. So, this is a crisis intake form, a tip sheet, meaning that this is once again a tip that was provided by somebody to the FBI. This isn't somebody that was anonymous. This is someone whose identity was known, who the FBI then investigated. You can see this tip was received August 8th, 2019, so after Epstein was arrested, and the tip goes as follows. Real quickly, if you could do one thing for me today, please leave me a comment on this video. Let me know your thoughts on this document, on what this document means. You can comment anything. Thanks for making this video. I hated this video. I don't really care what you say. Just comment and like the video, because those likes and those comments help show the algorithm that there are people out there watching my videos, that enjoy these videos, that are learning something from these videos, and that helps the videos get shown to more people, so we can teach more people about these things and raise more awareness and point out flaws in the official stories or evidence that's being ignored. Anyways, be sure to like and comment. Subscribe too, that doesn't hurt. And yeah, let's get back to it. On blank at blank PM ET blank, protect identity, DOB blank, telephone number blank, home address blank, called the FBI National Threat Operations Center, NTOC, to report being by Jeffrey Epstein and other powerful men in New York. Blank provided the following information. Blank was modeling in 2015 at the age of blank when she met Epstein. She attended blank parties at Epstein's residence in New York. During one of the parties, Epstein asked blank to take a tour of blank. Once blank, Epstein asked blank to take off her. When she didn't comply, he said, "It's fine, I'll pay you $500. Blank complied because she thought he was a very important person. In 2016, Epstein slid his fingers up her dress and her. At one of the parties, two twin brothers, Alan and Orrin, who were involved in real estate, lured Blank and her friend Blank upstairs and locked the door.
Epstein needs to be dead. If he's not dead, I'm going to kill myself.
And the two ran
Absolutely
back downstairs.
ridiculous. He needs to be dead.
Blank stated Orrin, Blank, and Orrin's brother, Tao, a girl named Blank. Blank tried to, after the incident. Blank also met three women in the parlor room of Epstein's home. One woman she recognized as Epstein's British socialite. The woman would find young girls to have with Epstein. Epstein liked younger girls that were clean-shaven.
I'm sure he did, that little sick fucker.
Blank also went to his St. Thomas Island, which he referred to as St. Jeffrey. Epstein and other powerful men including Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, would have big parties with her, other young girls, and older Victoria's Secret models. Blank was offered to be
You don't really
by a
believe
lawyer
that. You don't
associated
reserve
with the
any
Epstein case.
response.
Blank is friends with Blank. Went
You're
out
one of
to
those
dinner
guys,
with
huh?
Blank and the lawyer Blank. That's when the lawyer
I
offered
can give
to
you
pay
what you
a
want.
couple grand
Just
to
say it.
silence her.
Give it to me,
Blank is
Choombacabra
terrified that they
Daddy.
might
Just
put
say
out
it.
a
That's all you
hit
gotta
on
say in the
her,
comments.
and they
Give it
know
to
where
me.
she lives.
Just say,
Blank
give
had
it to me,
contact with
and I will
Epstein
give
from
it to you.
2015 to 2019.
I'll give you
Last
exactly what you
contact
want.
was blank ago.
Just say
Blank
it.
was also contacted by one of Epstein's
I try to be
clientels,
nice, but just say
Blank,
give it to
before
me.
his arrest, asking her to meet up with
Sick
Epstein.
bastard.
Blank can be contacted on her son's
I'll
telephone
give it to you.
for
Trust
questioning.
me.
And then they talk about their investigation.
You got
what is
nothing to
absolutely
say.
insane about this is 2019, folks, and this victim is alleging that they were involved in these, that involved Donald Trump as far
No
back
nuts.
as after 2015, so 2015
No
2019,
nuts.
and that yes,
You wouldn't
Trump
continue your shit
was,
talking.
for the most part, I mean, in office or right before he became in office. I mean, I don't know. There are a lot of things though that make this tip incredibly credible. First
Okay,
of all,
there you go. That's all you have to
the fact that this
say.
victim discusses
Bye.
Victoria's Secret
Enjoy
models
your life.
at some of these parties. Now, it's been known that
You
Epstein
asked
and
for it, bud.
Wexner had a relationship, and it really wasn't like widely known.
Fucking
that
Epstein
Les
lover,
Wexner
dude. You're a
was
sick
that
fucker.
involved with Epstein back then.
I'm praying for
I mean,
you.
this is right after Epstein was arrested, and people were kind of scrambling to figure out what really went down here. And Les Wexner obviously was at one point the head of, I mean, a lot of different brands, from Victoria's Secret to Bath and Body Works. So he's deeply tied into those companies. But the fact that this victim alleges that Victoria's Secret models were present, that's one thing that makes this credible, because that just wasn't
What a sad
widely
bastard.
knowledge at the time.
Praying
But to
for him.
me, the thing that really absolutely shocked me to my core, when I first
Epstein
saw this,
supporters
was the
crazy.
mention
And the
of
big 2-6.
Alan and Orrin
Insane,
as
even.
being people that were involved in Epstein's network. And if you do not know, there actually are two brothers named Alan and Orrin who were just 8 days ago convicted in a massive trial. And these are Alan Alexander and Orrin Alexander, both of whom have been charged and convicted of. Now, the two brothers were actually, you can see here, they are right here. They actually are two brothers, and like the tip says, these are brothers that were involved in real estate. There were rumors that these two were, for years, and I've actually gone down the Orrin and Alan rabbit hole in the past. There's actually 3 of the brothers who were all convicted in this trial. And it's actually insane how many people over the years went to the authorities, went to the police, that were silenced just dealing with these 3 guys. And these 3 guys are were incredibly powerful, incredibly wealthy individuals, but they had really, really good reputations. And in New York, I mean, at the time that this allegation was made, there were no big news stories about these guys being involved in this sort of a thing. They had not been arrested. They wouldn't be arrested for years, and this wouldn't become an actual news story for years until I think they were arrested. Yeah, they actually, as you can see here, this is from the Justice Department. They actually weren't charged until 2024, so just a few years ago, and they were just convicted last week. But as you can see, defendants' alleged conduct spanned more than a decade in multiple states. So these guys actually were big time in New York. They were big time real estate guys in New York, but their case was presented in Miami, Florida. You know, I mean, let's just read this quote. U.S. Attorney Damian Williams said, as alleged in the indictment, for more than a decade, the Alexander brothers, alone and together, repeatedly and violently, and dozens of female victims. Today, the defendants are charged with multiple offenses. Our investigation is far from over. If you've been a victim or you know anything about their crimes, we urge you to come forward. From at least in or about 2010 up to and including at least in or about 2021, the Alexander brothers worked together and with others to engage in, including by repeatedly drugging and dozens of female victims. The brothers, who reside primarily in New York and Miami, Florida, have considerable social and financial connections, including through Orrin Alexander and Tal Alexander's positions as prominent real estate agents focused on ultra-luxury markets. The brothers used their wealth and prominent positions in real estate to create and facilitate opportunities to women. So we can read all of this all day and read through this. They've actually been convicted, but that tracks with the tip. So this victim in 2019, 5 years before these brothers were indicted and then arrested, they were giving information to the FBI claiming that these brothers were working with Jeffrey Epstein to procure women and to victimize women and young girls, including girls as young as, like, claimed in the tip. And it's even weirder because, like I just read to you, the three brothers not only lived in New York and were primarily based in New York, but their other primary residence is Florida, Miami, Florida, which, I don't know if you realize, is a stone's throw away from West Palm Beach, where our boy Jeffrey Epstein was also mainly located. So not only do you have a victim accusing these guys of being involved with Epstein, their primary residences were the same two primary residence areas where Jeffrey Epstein was located, where he was all the time. And now these brothers, 7 years or so after that tip was submitted to the FBI and 5 years before they were arrested and indicted, and this became public knowledge and big news, now they're in prison for the of dozens, if not hundreds, of women. And so that's weird, right? That's really weird. Actually, I might be wrong. I think they were convicted in New York court, I guess. They were arrested, held without bail since December 2024 in Miami. But let me just read you. So these guys are linked with Epstein and linked with Trump, right? The Alexander brothers. And this is information provided to the FBI 5 years or so before these brothers are indicted and it becomes public knowledge that these are maniacs. At this point in time in 2019, these guys were rock star luxury real estate brokers in New York City. It's a fast fall from the peak of their recent status as a high-powered real estate family. Tal and Orrin had become two of America's leading brokers amid a sea of reality TV-powered super sales. They helped sell a $238 million Central Park apartment to hedge fund titan Ken Griffin, and became go-to agents for bold-faced names including Kim Kardashian and Kanye West and Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. Now, isn't that bizarre? Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, these brothers, were their real estate agents. Okay, so here's another article about that. Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner used Orrin Alexander to purchase their home. The couple bought the $24 million mansion in the exclusive Florida enclave of Indian Creek Village in 2020. So they bought this home from these brothers in 2020, a few months after Trump's first term ended. That means that somebody from the Trump family was in contact closely with the Alexander brothers in 2020. In 2019, somebody submits a tip to the FBI saying those brothers picked and very young girls, along with Jeffrey Epstein, and that Donald Trump and Bill Clinton and others participated in basically alleging all these people are interconnected. And keep in mind, this is just proof of that. The brothers were not known to be evil people publicly at that point. In 2020, Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner were chumming it up with Orrin Alexander, one of the brothers convicted of, and he sold them their, $24 million mansion. He sold them that mansion a year or so after Orrin and his brother are accused of, with Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, one of them sells a home to Trump's family members. And there are much deeper, darker ties that we could get into here, but I just wanted this to be a brief thing, and I do want to end it on one one detail. So I've seen people talking about this, and I actually have had this saved for a while now, and I've wanted to make this video. But to me, this is an incredibly credible accusation because of the inclusion of Alan and Oren and all those details. And this wasn't huge public knowledge back then. And I mean, you have the allegations here. I mean, there's some really graphic stuff in here, but it's this right here that we need to focus on. Blank also went to his St. Thomas Island, which he referred to as St. Jeffrey. That's so curious to me because in the press, the island has always been known really as Epstein Island. It's never been known as Jeffrey's Island or Little St. Jeffrey's Island or Little St. Jeff's. The media has never called it that. It's always been called Epstein Island, Epstein's Island, or Island. That's just kind of the name that the place was given. It's either that or Little St. James. I either hear Epstein Island or Little St. James. I've never heard St. Jeffrey. But something that I found that could prove to be relevant here was this photograph from a different Epstein file. You can see here's the EFTA number down here. This picture obviously was taken before 2019, and this is Jeffrey Epstein right here. They're in New York. I talked about this in a different video. But look what's printed on Epstein's pants. Little St. Jeff's. Now, that is pretty interesting, right? This victim in 2019 is telling the FBI that Epstein referred to his island as St. Jeffrey's, or St. Jeffrey, and here Epstein is wearing pants that say Little St. Jeff's, which to me, these pictures were not public. None of that knowledge was public knowledge back then. This is August 2019. At this point, Jeffrey Epstein is still alive. His trial is still coming. People are just starting to investigate. And it's a crazy arrest, yeah, but it hasn't turned into what it is today with investigative journalists going crazy. And people are just learning the name Epstein. So the Little St. Jeffrey, Little St. Jeff's thing, at least to my knowledge, isn't like extremely public knowledge at this point. And yet here we have a victim stating that, and then here's a picture of Epstein years ago wearing pants with that printed on it, meaning that that's what he called Epstein Island, Little St. Jeff's. I mean, it's weird. Epstein's got merch with the name of his own property printed on it, and he's wearing it out in public. I mean, that's strange, but it's also besides the point. It's more the fact that not only is this girl talking about Victoria's Secret models when the Les Wexner connection was barely notable at that time, not only is she talking about Oren and Alan Alexander, the real estate brothers who were young girls who years later they actually were revealed to be young girls, and they're now convicted of that and they're in prison. But there's also small little things like the Little St. Jeff's or St. Jeffrey that this girl claims, she was to, that Epstein brought her to. And then what does that mean? That means that from 2015 to 2019, that's when this girl was. That means that Epstein, as we know, was still active and actively during those years. And if this is true, I mean, this woman's talking about the British socialite and all these different things that Epstein liked, but that means that from 2015 to 2019, Clinton and Trump were involved with Epstein attending orgies on Epstein Island with children. So make of this what you will. It's an explosive file. It's a very, very dark file, but to me, it's extremely credible for so many reasons and because of all the tiny details that are found within this one document. And I guarantee you there are hundreds, if not thousands and thousands more documents exactly like this that have yet to be found, but I'm going to continue reporting on them up until the very end. Until next time, y'all, I'll be back in a day or two. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Be sure to like the video, leave me a comment, keep that tinfoil hat on, stay suspicious, question everything, and I'll see you next time.
arrest people for not having their television license. British comedy. Anyway, from there, one of the daughters by the name of Jeanette began to act very strange. She began speaking in different voices and snarling periodically, and began adopting various different personalities and speaking through them. The most interesting of which being a man by the name of Bill, who she said died of a hemorrhage within the home a few years ago, which sure enough, it turns out that a man named Bill had died in the living room of that house of a hemorrhage. There was a bunch of other, your standard weird chairs floating and other creepy paranormal stuff. Really, with any of these, you can assume there's some like moving furniture and like creepy whispers at night. The initial news crews who came to document the situation got a lot of footage of Jeanette in her possessed or sporadic states, which is where images like this come from, of her like touching the ceiling in her room. And once again, you may be asking yourself, where are the Warrens? Well, they came in for one day, said, yep, you got demons. Have a good one. Really, they were so busy at this point, they just show up for one day and they're like, yep, that's demons, you should probably call someone about that, and then got out of there. Despite the Warrens' low influence in this case overall, this is the inspiration for The Conjuring 2. Eventually, they just stopped, and at the end of the video, I'll get into some of my theories about like what these mean or what the connections are between different cases. I don't want to spoil or talk about anything too consequentially right now, but we'll get to it. But eventually the poltergeist just quit. Meanwhile, the Warrens were off to bigger and better things, which led them to the Snedeker house. In 1986, the Snedekers moved to a new house in Southington, Connecticut. This house was originally a mortuary in the 1920s, which is a fantastic place to raise a family. And when I mean like mortuary, I mean like in the basement there were blood drains for whenever they did the whole corpse dissection stuff. And whenever they cleared out the basement, they found a bunch of like old surgery tools and like embalming equipment. Also, upon further inspection of the house once they got in there, within the basement they found several drawers full of pictures of various corpses, and then later figured out there was a cemetery for unmarked graves in the backyard. So as you can imagine, the place was haunted. It started off with like, I guess, relatively chill stuff, like they would just see dead bodies out of the corner there. Well, I mean, that's not chill in your house, but it wasn't anything attacking them. It was just like real quick, they glimpsed like, someone in a suit laying on a table or whatever, along with hearing whispers and noises in the night, until there was a couple apparitions they began seeing around the house. One of them being a man with, quote, pale skin, high cheekbones, no eyes, and long black hair, and another man who had white hair, wore a pinstripe suit, and his feet were always moving. That brings the worst conjurings to my mind. That brings the worst thoughts to my mind I could possibly imagine. Like, do you mean he's running at you all the time? Or like, are they vibrate? Like, both of those are terrifying. And then various weird things around the house started to happen. Like, for example, they had a very sick son who was battling a form of cancer. And one day they brought him into the house on, I believe it's like a bed gurney, and then the gurney just started like spinning in the dining room. That same son began to beg to go back to sleep at the hospital because he began hearing voices and seeing those previously mentioned figures within his room. Now, I think the son was the first one to see the figures, which gives the parents a little bit of leeway, but I still feel like even if you haven't seen them yet, if your son comes up to you and describes the things I just described as being in the corner of his room, you don't be like, grow up, be a man. Go fight him, this is your house. Eventually the son's demeanor began to change, until one day he just violently attacked his cousin. After this, the son began staying at the hospital in which he was being treated, and whatever was within the house got a lot more violent. There's a specific idea within ideas of demonology of something known as a succubus, and alternatively an incubus. So a succubus is a female demon or entity that tries to seduce men, and incubus is a male demon entity that tries to seduce women. Or at least that's how they're originally described in literature. I guess they can go either way, but you get the point. The women of the house, specifically the mother and oldest daughter, began saying that they were constantly being harassed by whatever the spirit was in the most inappropriate sense. To the point that one night, and I got demonetized in my last video because thankfully I got it back from YouTube, but because I said the word for committing not living. I said that word and they took my monetization away. So I'm not even going to begin to describe what this woman just said on TV. But the mother was in an interview on television. She was like, well, you know, my daughter was in the house and the demon started just like, bleep, bleep. No filter whatsoever. But according to her, one night her and her daughter just sprinted out of the house and began running down the road as these spirits were still touching them. It was at this point, and again, they should have done this on day one, like the moment I see anything that even remotely resembles a dead body in my house, I'm either burning it or getting a priest. But they, at this point, call in the Warrens, who spent 9 weeks with the family. According to the Warrens, on a scale of 1 to 10, for like how bad a possession can be, this was a 9. And there's a story around this time, which I couldn't like certify where it came from, but that when it was a mortuary, the people who ran it were using bodies for aphilia of the necro variety, which would explain, you know, the things that were going on. Really evil, bad spirits want them out. So after a series of exorcisms, these spirits were kicked out, and the family went on to a life of luxury after this was adapted into The Haunting in Connecticut. Now, there's a lot of, like, I don't want to say holes, but there's a lot of things I'm going to bring up with this one at the end, but I'll hold off for now. So we'll just move on to our next case, which is that of the Smurl family. In 1974, the Smurl family moved into their new home in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. They said that there was always a sort of creepy vibe in the house, like, you know, things creaking randomly or people misplacing objects. But it wasn't until several years of living in the home that things got to the point that they began hearing random voices. Specifically, the mother, who would say that whenever she was going to bed at night, she would hear someone trying to talk to her. These voices got louder and eventually began to go around to everyone else in the household before weird acts of violence began happening in the house. Like one day, their dog just simply floated off of the ground and then was thrown directly into a wall. And around the same time, their daughter had a ceiling fan just randomly fall out of the middle of nowhere and nearly kill her, only slightly injuring her by cutting her face. Remember the whole succubus incubus thing I mentioned a second ago? Well, that was happening to the mother and father as well during this time, which I'm not making light of it. I don't necessarily know how much of this I believe, but I definitely know that I believe in demonic presence. However, I have to mention this. The father's story was that his encounter, which again, not funny, not making light of it, but that it occurred while he was in the living room watching a baseball game. So, I just want to know, did he finish watching? After this, it was determined that things were not okay, so the Warrens were invited in. The Warrens described that there were 4 entities within the house, 3 of them being wayward spirits, and 1 being a demon that was directing them to carry out these actions, which led to the aforementioned most interesting 7th inning in baseball history. Also around this time, like, it got big in the media that this was going on, and there were reporters there all the time and cameras everywhere, and it became a whole deal. Eventually, 4 exorcisms were performed, 1 for each of the spirits, and every time there was, like, chairs flying everywhere and stuff floating and levitating, and again, your standard hocus pocus. And then after the 4th exorcism, everything seemed to be good to go, and the Warrens had another one in the books, for which this story was adapted into the movie The Haunted. Now, we've got one more to talk about, and if you are familiar with the Warrens, or even more specifically, a critic of them, you may realize there's a story that I skipped over, and that's because I wanted to save it for now. And that is the case of Arnie Johnson Cheyenne. Before I get into the reason this is such a controversial case for the Warrens, and the #1 thing that their detractors cite, I've got to give some background to why this was such a spicy topic to begin with. Johnson was 19 years old and living with his fiancée, Debbie. Also living with him was Debbie's, at the time, 11-year-old brother, David. One day, whenever they were about to go to a new apartment, David said that there was a man there who was very old, had gray hair, and was wearing a flannel shirt that was scaring him. Initially, they didn't really believe David and just thought that it was his imagination playing with him, until after they left that apartment, David said that he could still see the old man, but now he's appearing to him as a beast. Not only that, but a beast that's speaking Latin. which is almost definitely a bad thing. And it was threatening them that if they live in that apartment, bad things would happen to David's family. It was around this time that David would wake up covered in scratches and deep bruises, as well as he quit telling them of what was happening and just became kind of distant and quiet. With doctors having no explanation for how this was happening to him, the family called the church, who then sent the Warrens. As soon as they got there, Lorraine said that she could see a black mist surrounding David and constantly trying to choke him, which again, almost definitely a bad thing. So, getting confirmation to the church, a priest comes and they perform an exorcism. During the exorcism, David began to levitate off the bed and began saying stuff in Latin. It didn't work, and subsequent exorcisms had to be performed. One day, Johnson, who was the 19-year-old soon-to-be brother-in-law to David, was so desperate watching David cry out and scream during an exorcism, saying that it's inside of him and can't come out, that Johnson grabbed David, looked him in the face, and said, "Get out of my little buddy, why don't you just take me instead?" Immediately after this, everyone testified that Johnson had a massive mood shift. Before this, Johnson was, as everyone accounted, even the Warrens, a very kind and sympathetic man who was nice to everyone he met. But the moment that he said that, he immediately became retracted and quiet. It was the next day that Johnson went back to that original property where David had said he saw the man, to which Johnson said he felt a calling from a well at the back of the property. Later, Johnson would recount that he goes there, he went to the well, looked down, and the beast was in the bottom of it. And when the two made eye contact, he had no memory from that moment until the moment I'm about to describe. During this period of time where Johnson was supposedly possessed, Debbie said that he would begin to growl and hallucinate and say random words and then not remember that he did so. The Warrens were keeping a close eye on this, specifically Lorraine, who, you know, if during an exorcism someone looks at the demon, it's like, "Why don't you possess me?" and then they start acting weird, it's probably, you know, something to keep on your radar. Until one day, Johnson was at Debbie's place of work, to which her boss was a friend of Johnson. So this man, who I'm just going to call the boss, was the boss of his fiance and his close friend. For whatever reason, an altercation broke out between this boss and Johnson, and everywhere I've read, it seems that the boss had grabbed Johnson's little sister, and I don't think in an inappropriate way. From all the reading I did, it seems like his little sister was just being a ruckus, and he was kind of drunk, so he was like, "Hey, quit that out." And Johnson just went off on him. And then during this altercation, he began to growl, scream, pulled a pocket knife, and Johnson stabbed his friend to death. And from there, Johnson came back to consciousness, snapped out of it, and began freaking out at what had just happened. He turned himself in, and for the first time in United States history, argued not guilty by reason of possession, with famously the Warrens going to testify to the police on his behalf, saying he was not responsible as he was possessed by a demon. This is the reason a lot of people who don't believe in all the demonic stuff have an issue with this case, because this is one of the few times that even someone who's religious could look at this and be like, that may be a kind of slippery slope to go down. But because of this, the case immediately gained widespread media attention, because a guy's saying that the devil made him kill somebody. Needless to say, as you can imagine, the judge threw it out. However, he did get his charge down to first-degree manslaughter and ended up only serving 5 years. So he pretty much got off for just, stabbing a guy to death in public. And Johnson and Debbie got married, had children, and lived perfectly happy lives from there on. And this story is going on to be the inspiration for Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It. Which I know these movies are kind of, exploitive in the first place. However, two things. One, I wonder how they're going to treat something in which someone actually died. Probably not well. And also, I wonder if they're going to use what's probably the wildest story in an appropriate sense and not embellish it. They probably won't. But with that, we have now concluded what is most likely the 7 most popular stories within the Warrens catalog. As mentioned before, with this, the Warrens were doing several other cases, and they have several other famous ones. Later in life, they became more dedicated to getting ghost on footage or physical proof of them, with Ed doing several things like the Union Cemetery videos, where he tried to get videos and supposedly did get videos of the white lady who moves through the graves. And then Ed passed away in 2006, and Lorraine later in 2019, both of natural causes. And to this day, their son-in-law, Tony Spurra, runs the aforementioned Nesper Group, which is still operating at full capacity from what I understand, and is also responsible for managing the occult artifacts that the Warrens had put together. So what I just presented to you is all of the unfiltered stories of the Warrens' account. I left out some of the more embellished details, like, every time there's a story like this, there's one kid who's like, oh, I saw 400 demons in my room, and like, I'm not talking about that stuff. This is the information that's considered true to the original cases. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of skepticism involved. As a matter of fact, there's an entire organization put together, the New England Skeptic Society, which has to be made of the funnest people ever, who was founded and spent a lot of their time to disprove a lot of the Warrens' findings. Now, obviously, the line of skepticism that you have to get over for all this is you just have to trust the accounts of a lot of people. And with a lot of these, there were several witnesses and different priests and things like that at the time, but a lot of people go to the conclusion of they're all in on it or they all made up the story. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's entirely down to your belief system. Like, for example, if you don't think demons or ghosts or any stuff like that's real, then this is all just going to be hogwash to you. Whereas if you believe in things like supernatural encounters and the more abstract than you may think, all of these are real. However, I believe the true answer, as we're going to see, lies somewhere in the middle. Also, if you've had fun with this and you want to plug your ears and just believe everything and go tell your friends about how cool it is, there's absolutely no shame in clicking off this video right now. Thank you so much for watching, but I'm going to explain a couple of nuances with these cases, because I have to defend my credibility at least somewhat. With cases like the Perrin family and Annabelle, that is a group of people who had a story that everyone in the family attests to, that neighbors attest to, and to the people that came to the house later attested to. And with situations like that, it's pretty much face value, either you take it or you leave it. However, with cases like the Amityville Horror, I'd be amiss if I didn't talk about some of the more interesting debunkings. For example, the family's lawyer had said that him and the father got drunk one night and came up with the entire story of the haunting and decided to sell it for money. Now, while it was absolutely profitable to the family to do that, no one else has ever come forward saying it was a hoax, including several of the other people who were involved, like the person who wrote the book and, the person who ran his car off a bridge and all that. And several neighbors have reported things like foul odors and sounds and other sort of secondary evidence, you could say, of an occurrence happening, even though they never profited from it and just kind of lived nearby. So that one could just be a lawyer trying to save his reputation and not seeming like a conspiracy or supernatural. Not that there's anything wrong with that. With cases like that where people will point at it and say, oh look, this guy says it was a lie, so it was definitely a lie, that's still everyone else's word against his. And with several of these situations, I'm not saying this necessarily applies to any of these, just with possessions and supernatural cases in general, just because someone thinks that they saw something that wasn't there, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're lying or being dishonest. Someone could legitimately believe that they are experiencing the phenomena or sensations that they think they are, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a conspiracy or something that everyone's in on. However, there's a couple that I think might be. For example, the Snedeker house, the one I mentioned as being the haunting in Connecticut. The mother, who was the main proponent of these stories going forward, very frequently changed her story. Like, for example, you heard the whole thing I said about how her and her daughter were constantly being attacked by these inappropriate demons. Well, in another interview she did, whenever someone was drilling her about, well, why did you let your children stay in a home where they were being abused by demons, which is a legitimate question, she said, oh, well, I didn't know it was happening. The same person who said she was running out of her house every night being assaulted was like, I didn't know what was going on. Also, she had said several times in the news that she didn't know it was haunted or was a morgue or funeral home or anything like that before they bought it. However, other people looked at the house, said that's impossible, because it was advertised as an old funeral home, and there was a sign when they bought it that said old historic funeral home in the front yard. And especially watching interviews with her, it really feels like she's loving that limelight. So I don't want to, I don't like debunking stuff. I want to keep the magic alive, right? But sometimes one comes along that's so bad, if you don't debunk it, it makes all the others look bad. Because I believe in demons and possessions and stuff like that, but if we just let everyone in, then we're all going to look stupid. So I've got to kick a couple out So I'm kicking the haunting in Connecticut out. There's also, and I kind of have to mention this if I'm making this video, several accusations against specifically Ed Warren's character, and I'm not here to speak ill of the dead, but specifically when it came to ideas of being greedy later in life. I think that the Warrens absolutely started out with good intentions, but when it came to ones like I mentioned, the haunting in Connecticut, in every interview I watched, he was very brash with people asking questions about it. Like, for example, whenever they're like, oh, well, there's no evidence that a priest came in and approved this or did an exorcism or whatever. And he'd be like, oh, it's priest so-and-so. And they're like, we can't find that guy. He would just get angry and be like, well, I don't have to tell you who they are because I'm Ed Warren and I can blah, blah, blah. And that's not the only example of Ed embellishing stuff to try to make it more profitable. And from all the stuff I saw, I feel like, and again, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but I feel like Lorraine was such like an excellent and sweet person, and Ed was for most of his life, but there was a lot of bad vibes I got later on. Like, for example, the guy who wrote the Amityville Horror said that whenever he talked to the Warrens, whenever he was originally writing the book, that every time the Warrens, like, there was a gap in information, like they didn't understand, like, oh, well, what happened for these few nights or whatever, Ed told the writer, I don't know, make it up and make it scary, which isn't, I mean, it's not like he lied in the reports because his story matched up with everyone else's, and it is like based on a true story book, so it's not like, you know, illegal to do it, but if you're like a near exorcist going in with the idea of we can make it more creepy, that's probably a bad vibe. And I don't want to like make everyone sad. Like, if you like the Conjuring movies and all that, like, absolutely go for it. That doesn't change your feeling. I'm not saying you have to feel this way. I highly encourage you to do your own research and see how you feel about them. But it just seems that, at least in Ed's case, he kind of got sour with it as time went on. And in trying to figure out how I feel about the Warrens and how I wanted to tackle describing them in this video, I feel the exact same way about them that I feel about the infield poltergeist. So if you remember, the infield poltergeist is that one I mentioned where the girls started growling and all that, and the chest moved across the floor and the police saw the chair move and all that. Real creepy stuff, right? Well, something that I didn't mention is throughout the course of this supernatural encounter that went on over the course of months, things started happening in the house. Like, there was bent spoons found lying in the drawer everywhere as if metal's twisting, and there was these weird tappings happening on the ceiling, and with hidden cameras that they had set up in order to catch supernatural phenomena, they saw the daughter Janet go through the house at night and bend all the spoons and then take a broom and tap on the ceiling. And what it seems happened is there may have been a legitimate form of possession or haunting or whatever, but then Janet liked the attention, so she kept amping it up. And that's where all the jumping and the screaming and the speaking in tongues and the bent spoons and all that come from. There's even a hidden video they got of her trying to bend an iron bar because she thought that would be creepy. And as she grew up, Janet admitted that the majority of the things she did was in order for the fame and popularity. I feel that, and again, I know this is really something about someone, but it would be amiss to just stand here and be like, wow, we're the Warrens, really cool, without talking about some of the issues they cause, because there is a legitimate argument and point to be made with not only cases like the Johnson Cheyenne Devil Made Me Do It, but also with general ideas of exorcism in general. I feel like the infield poltergeist is kind of a microcosm of them. Like, it may have started out as something legit, and I do believe it started out as something legit, potentially with the poltergeist too. At least I know the Warrens started out with good intentions, at least from the way they talked and the way they behaved. But as time went on, and this happens with all different kinds of people in different forms of media, you can see that success kind of builds this idea of direction and where to follow. And that's when, oh, we can help these people out, became, I don't know, make it creepy. See, because the issue with this stuff is whenever we're talking about something as serious as potentially, you know, a demonic possession, it's not just in the realm of church and religion anymore, it's in the realm of mental health. And do we lock people up for committing crimes? And what's the best treatment for someone going through this? And it goes from like opinions into we really need to nail down what we're talking about. So to have someone within that line tell an author, I don't know, just make it scary, kind of rubs me the wrong way. But I love Lorraine. if that's any consolation. Lorraine's such a sweet person, everything I've seen. And I don't know how much I believe in things like clairvoyance and all, at least to the degree that she used it. But she was such a kind soul. And Ed was for the majority of his life. I just got some bad vibes near the end. But both of them, I know they did a lot of great work in people's lives, and there was a lot of people that appreciated what they did, if nothing else in a soulful sense. But as I personally dive into stuff like this, I want to research and learn more about. I kind of have to remind myself not to dive in all at once, because everyone's got an agenda. And when it comes to like beliefs with all of this, there was this interesting allegory I read. Whenever I was reading about this, someone was talking about Annabelle, and I forget where it was said, but they said that they're pretty sure Annabelle isn't real. Like a 5 out of 6 chance they believe Annabelle, there's nothing supernatural about it or whatever. However, whenever you go to play Russian roulette, there's also a 5 out of 6 chance that nothing bad will happen to you. Or alternatively, you could just not play Russian roulette. And I feel with a lot of this stuff, I definitely believe in some of it, but I don't know how much I do believe. But I know when it comes to doing things like provoking demons or playing with Ouija boards and all of that, I think I'm just not going to play Russian roulette, which is the reason this is so interesting to me. And the reason that I love reading about the real cases, or quote-unquote real cases, to kind of establish a headway for it. And to me, these aren't even the scariest ones. I know a bunch that freak me out way more than this, that may be a video in itself one day, because they have more unexplainable characteristics to them, or at least can't be explained easily away with reason. But this is very interesting to me because as someone who's got that 1 in 6 chance that it might be real, I really like to dive into it. And not only that, but to absorb it, and hopefully you all enjoy listening to it. And I hope that you enjoyed, and thank you for watching. This is the spooky season, and what better spooky topic to go through with horror movies and the supernatural and creepy ghost spooky and all that stuff than the Warrens. And I hope near the end I didn't seem too harsh to everything they did. I just think near the end maybe their heart was in the wrong place, or at least Ed's was. Like reading about, it was kind of sad because reading about their early stuff, they were so into it, and so many people, and even near the end of life, so many people found them beneficial. But near the end, it got much more about, you know, the book deals and the movie deals, and it felt kind of murky. Again, especially as someone who thinks at least partly legitimate in it. But I love still reading about these cases. Like even without the Warrens, like hearing the true story of The Conjuring, so much more interesting to me than the story purveyed that a screenwriter wrote, because this is what people experience. And again, even if it's not real and you don't think it's real, at least for some of the people involved, it was probably a very legitimate emotion that they experienced, and I enjoy reading about that. So thank you all so much for watching. If I'm like jumbling my words or not as carefully charismatic as I normally am, I've been up all night researching because I want to get this video out soon, and then get another one out like on Halloween or the day before. So I've been up all night. It's currently 9 a.m. and that's the reason my speech be blah blah blah. But if you're still watching, thank you so much for watching. It really does mean a lot, and I appreciate it. We thank you, like honestly, guys. I don't post about it on Twitter or stuff all the time anymore because I'm sure it gets annoying. But 700,000 subs—that's an impossible number, and I'm trying not to freak out about it because I'm trying to just shelter it and put it in a box and not process it because I'll get nervous and be like, I don't deserve this and everything. But really, you guys are so kind, and it really does mean a lot. So thank you all so much for subscribing. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you to my patrons. Thank you to my top tier patrons that you can see here. You guys are fantastic. I couldn't do it without you. I love you all so much, and I really appreciate it. You allow me to do things like stay up all night reading about creepy demon cases and then talking them through the sunrise, and that means a lot. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. There will be another spooky video out with Halloween. Oh, people were asking about the conspiracy theory iceberg and the serial killer iceberg. I wanted this month to be exclusively spooky stuff, and then like finishing out the icebergs in November. You may be wondering why I didn't do the serial killer iceberg in Halloween because that would line up, but like during talking about spooky and supernatural, I don't want to be like, oh, and actual stories of people dying, isn't that spooky too? And it was a bad vibe. So I'll do it early in November. Thank you all for being patient on that. But there'll be another creepy video out, and then we'll get back on those. But for now, I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! As anyone who was around before the modern age of the internet will tell you, there was a time before viral videos and a constant stream of information when all people had to work off of were urban legends, stories around a water cooler, and sensationalist headlines, and Nokia phones that let you play Snake. But because continuous information wasn't as readily available, some stories or headlines would spread across county lines, state lines, even oceans. From dinner parties to school hallways, people would whisper stories about the kid who died from drinking Coca-Cola and eating Pop Rocks, or how flashing your high beams at a car with their lights off will get you killed by a gang member, or that Marilyn Manson surgically removed his bottom rib so that he could, one good story would go a lot further than it could today. But even if you weren't alive yet in the 90s or were too young to remember it like I was, there's another story from that era that has persisted throughout the decades, and it goes something like this. Stop me if you've heard it. A woman spills a cup of McDonald's coffee on herself, sues McDonald's because the coffee was a little hot, and is awarded millions and millions of dollars by the court. I feel like as a kid, nearly every time I was in a drive-thru, someone would repeat this story. Normally my parents would say something like, oh, that coffee is certainly hot, make sure you don't spill it. One woman spilled some on her and managed to sue McDonald's and got a bunch of money. I'm sure we've all heard it to some degree. And while the gist of the story regarding the spilled coffee is mostly true, the details painted a more complete picture. And unfortunately, those details, especially when this story first emerged in 1992, were mostly lost in the mainstream narrative. And while in recent years there's been some attention given to the true story behind the headlines, for years the prevailing thought for most people was the same as when the story first broke. That this was nothing more than a frivolous lawsuit from a clumsy and litigious woman who was clearly gaming the system. After all, millions of people around the world successfully drink their coffee every morning without spilling it on themselves, so why should she get special treatment and a 7-figure payout? Even worse, many believe this case in particular was responsible for kickstarting a new era of frivolous litigations in America. This included a man suing Michael Jordan for the emotional distress caused by having the same name as him, a judge suing his dry cleaner $67 million for misplacing a pair of slacks, and a convicted criminal who sued himself for violating his own civil rights. I've got to talk about that guy one day. But the true story of the McDonald's coffee lawsuit may not be as ridiculous as you initially thought. Sadly, may prove to be all the more tragic. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. The term fake news might be a newer concept, at least the phrase being used as much as it is now. But actual fake news, as regulars of the channel probably know by now, is hardly new. For example, this AP headline from 1993 claims, quote, "Coffee too hot, jury agrees with burn victim." While sure, I guess it's technically true, the headline hardly conveys the whole truth and downplays the severity of the incident. But of course, that didn't stop the story from spreading. Not to say it's entirely the AP's fault, it's just one of many publications that has some part of the blame. And unfortunately, this didn't stop Stella Liebeck from becoming the new face of American greed, all while a multinational corporation worth billions of dollars was made out to be the victim of a pandering justice system. This story is less about clumsy hands than it is about corporate negligence. But we'll get there in a bit. But first, we need to establish some more stuff around this case. Let's start with coffee. If you're not a coffee drinker, then you're in the minority. 70% of America, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I'm literally drinking coffee. As I read that line, I didn't even process that. Well, so yeah, get on board. 70% of American adults have coffee at least once a day in some form or another, and a cup of coffee has one of the highest profit margins of any item on a food menu. So if you're a restaurant who serves breakfast like McDonald's, it would be smart business to capitalize on that. And nowadays, if you walk into any establishment that is vaguely breakfast related, you will be assaulted with a menu that would kill a pilgrim. Lattes, cortados, mochas, macchiatos, cold brews, cold foams, vanilla, lavender, whipped, frozen.
You can barbecue it, boil it, broil it, bake it, saute it.
Anything you can imagine. But these options weren't really prevalent until the 2000s, after the Starbucks CEO, Howard Schultz, introduced the world at large to the Frappuccino. In the 90s, and definitely in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there was really only one way you took a cup of coffee: hot and from a pot, potentially with cream or sugar. And this was exactly how McDonald's brewed and served theirs, which is all Stella Liebeck wanted: a cup of reasonably hot coffee, along with some cream and sugar. Unfortunately, that's not how the world saw it. The story that millions of Americans heard from the news and their neighbors was that Miss Liebeck was driving, balancing a fresh cup of McDonald's coffee between her legs. She spilled the cup, and it burned her lap a little. And then she used this as an excuse to once again sue for millions of dollars. So, let's talk about what actually happened. With our first mistake in the narrative that most people believe, the idea that she was driving. In reality, Stella Liebeck was in the passenger seat of her grandson Chris Keano's Ford Pro. Good grandson that he was, Chris had planned to chauffeur his grandma around for the day, helping her run errands. Keep in mind that Stella Liebeck was 79 years old. Their first stop was McDonald's to get their day started off, as you can imagine, with a cup of coffee. One detail about the narrative everyone believes that is true is that she was holding the cup of coffee between her legs. This is true on its own, but again, she wasn't driving, so it's not like she was balancing it between her legs with her hands on the wheel, being reckless. She was holding it in between her legs because her grandson's car didn't have a cup holder. They pulled up to the drive-thru window. Stella paid her 49 cents in exchange for a cup of black coffee. Man, 49 cents. Wow. Asked for a couple cream and sugar packets, and they pulled into a parking spot so Stella could fix her coffee just how she wanted. And when she went to open the lid, the cup spilled onto her lap, soaking into her cotton sweatpants and all over her lap and legs. And instead of going on their morning errands, her grandson Chris had to rush Stella Liebeck to the emergency room. Which brings us to the biggest problem with the narrative most people believe: that the cup of coffee burned her lap a little, when in reality, have you ever seen a skin graft procedure? I have, but I wouldn't recommend it for the faint of heart. A skin graft involves clipping or shaving a large patch of your own skin with what looks like an old school safety razor, basically down to the roots of your skin, so that when you lay it over the part of your body that needs it, it can have a chance to grow back. Imagine moving a section of grass to a dirt patch, except very bloody and skin colored. It's not a superficial procedure. Well, I can tell you that that cup of coffee was so hot that Stella Liebeck needed several of these immediately following the spill, due to the numerous second and even third degree burns she sustained from the coffee. It was so bad that she went into shock, had to spend 8 days in the hospital, and lost 20 pounds. She spent the next 2 years in and out of various medical treatments, and her skin was permanently disfigured. All thanks to a 49-cent cup of McDonald's coffee. Imagine how hot that liquid needed to be in order to cause that. Well, actually, you don't have to imagine, because that's what I'm here for. Short version, it was really hot. According to the McDonald's employee manual, employees, who I remind you are not trained chefs nor scientists, were required to brew the coffee between 195 and 205 degrees in order to extract the optimal coffee flavor, then hold that coffee between 180 and 190 degrees. Again, just for context, the maximum temperature something like a jacuzzi is allowed to go to is around 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And yeah, I know a lot of you sick freaks like me want the hot tub to be even hotter and just make it as hot as possible, and you should be locked up in a cage, preferably one with a jacuzzi. Or how about this? The hottest that your hot water gets in your kitchen faucet should be about 120 degrees. Soup in a restaurant is served at a maximum of around 160 degrees. And just so we keep context here, water boils at 212 degrees, or just a few degrees above the maximum threshold that McDonald's employees were supposed to brew their coffee at. So let's say that the employees made a mistake and brewed a pot of coffee a little hotter than usual, like a few percent too hot, or they kept it heated a few more degrees past the 190 degree threshold. And let's say that Stella Liebeck was given the freshest cup from the freshest batch they had that morning. Given all of that, it is extremely possible that the cup the employee handed her was filled with a liquid in excess of 200 degrees. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think restaurant employees, especially ones who are underpaid, and many who were at the time working for a minimum wage of well under $4 an hour, should have the responsibility of trying not to scald old grandmas with boiling hot bean water while trying to get orders made and served as quickly as possible to a drive-thru full of people. And to be clear, I'm not diminishing anyone who works at this job, let alone restaurant workers. My point is that there is a reasonable expectation of responsibility for people in dangerous jobs. And pretty much always, those jobs are compensated with higher wages to go along with that responsibility. But if you're not going to pay people the reasonable wage for a job that is now handing dangerous materials to people out of a drive-through window or give them the proper training, it's not really fair to pay someone minimum wage and then expect them to manage a dangerous position that the corporate office put them in to begin with. And of course, the most important part of this entire story, the 79-year-old woman who had third-degree burns went into shock and had to be in and out of the hospital getting procedures for the next 2 years. Roughly $11,000 later, Stella Liebeck was out of the hospital. Her daughter had to take time off work to tend to her mother, so with the help of her son-in-law, Stella wrote to McDonald's corporate asking for two things. One, compensation for her medical bills and lost wages for her daughter. This was for the sum of $20,000. And two, more of a question than a request. Stella wanted to know if the coffee machine at this Albuquerque location was defective. In the letter she wrote, quote, "Your machine must be too hot, so look at it and fix it if it's broken. It must be an aberration," end quote. So all she wanted was them to fix the coffee machine if it was broken, and surely it had to be, and $20,000 for, again, multiple skin grafts and what would end up being 2 years in a hospital. And again, only $20,000 for what turned out to be multiple burns and medical procedures. All sounds perfectly reasonable to me. But you can probably guess how the multinational corporation worth almost $10 billion at the time responded to Stella's request. No counteroffer, no apology. If your last name is McDonald and you're watching this, you might be thinking, $20,000. She spilled it on herself. It's her fault. And it's a one-off, freak accident. Why is my dad's restaurant responsible if you are specifically the McDonald who is the child of the original McDonald, but the guy who started the McDonald chain isn't even McDonald. He bought the name off of McDonald. So if you're also that guy's son / daughter / child, I guess you'd ask that. Sounded better in my head. I mean, she even said it herself. Quote, "It must be an aberration." Well, it actually wasn't an aberration. Between 1982 and 1992, in the 10 years leading up to the incident, McDonald's had 700, that is 7 and 2 zeros, claims brought against them from customers being burned by their coffee. Not all of them resulted in third-degree burns. Not all of them happened to 79-year-old women, but more than a few definitely did. So not only was this woman, who a lot of people think as just some grifter who was trying to get money from a big company, not only was the injury way worse than most people think, but there was also a precedence for it. I would like to point to a 1992 McDonald's commercial which posed a question for both its customers and employees: what's the best thing about McDonald's breakfast?
Take one and action. Hey, what's the best thing about breakfast at McDonald's?
Coffee.
Well, the coffee's steaming, it's dark and rich.
I pour it personally.
Coffee fresh?
Fresh bread. Fantastic cup of coffee.
So what's the secret?
Arabica.
Oh, what's an Arabica?
Arabica bean.
Oh, the beans. And what else?
It's always fresh.
It just tastes good.
And they like to come in and talk with each other, and just like the small coffee shop long ago.
How much a coffee refill?
They're free. What you want is what you get. What's up?
There.
Obviously, the correct answer is the bacon, egg, and cheese McGriddle, so there's clearly propaganda at play. With coffee's high profit margin, McDonald's wanted to push their coffee. So everyone and their mom, paid actress in the commercial by the way, answered the question the same way. The coffee, of course. And nearly every shot in the ad features a cloud of hot steam emanating from a pot or cup in the hands of smiling customers or employees. The commercial really wants you to know that their coffee is fresh brewed, and always fresh, which means hot. And they were perfectly okay with it. In fact, their track record of scalding coffee had already cost them over $500,000 up to this point. Again, 700 people, that's a lot of settlements, including a settlement of $27,500 to a woman in Houston who suffered third-degree burns 6 years earlier. So Stella asking for $20,000 was not egregious or unheard of. In fact, it was shockingly reasonable considering the precedent that had been well established already. But McDonald's didn't choose reasonable. They chose a battle that Stella Liebeck was willing to fight. So for help, considering McDonald's was not willing to pay her medical bills that they certainly caused, again, why does anyone need to be handed a 200-degree cup? My word. So for help, she turned to the very same lawyer who had previously helped the woman in Houston. His name was Reed Morgan. And that makes sense, right? This woman has third-degree burns, so go to the attorney who previously got money out of McDonald's for another woman that had third-degree burns. Before a suit was filed, Reed Morgan suggested McDonald's compensate Stella $90,000 to cover her medical bills, along with pain and suffering. Again, if McDonald's would have just responded to the first letter, they could have paid $20 grand for all of this to go away. But they didn't want to play ball, so now the price was $90. Once again, however, McDonald's didn't want to cooperate. Their counteroffer, $800.28. I'm not kidding. They said, we hear you with like 20,000, now you want 90,000. Best we can do, 800. And hear me out, 28 cents. Almost to another cup of coffee. It would have been less insulting if they just sent a letter that said no. Like no address or anything, just the word no. That would be more respectful. I think it's also important to note that Stella Liebeck had never filed a lawsuit in her life. She was not, nor did she want to be, a litigious person. The entire narrative around her being a predatory person who is trying to pull a slip and fall stunt to get money out of a business has absolutely no validation. She was 79 years old, was severely hurt, and now is looking for an attorney. At a certain point, you have to decide if you want to stand up and fight or let someone bigger, richer, and more powerful than you kick you to the curb. And then in the case of McDonald's, laugh at you for offering $800.28. So in 1993, Stella, with help from Reed Morgan, filed a lawsuit against McDonald's for gross negligence, stating that they knowingly sold coffee that was unreasonably hot, dangerous, and without adequate warning as such. She sought both compensatory and punitive damages. Compensatory for the medical bills and pain and suffering, and punitive as punishment to McDonald's for serving freshly brewed coffee that is actually just scalding hot, despite being aware of the inherent dangers it presented. Once again, they had 700 other cases as precedents. Leading up to the trial, Stella attempted to settle twice. First, for $300,000, which again, if my grandmother was burned by a company's coffee, I'd be gunning for far more. I think 300,000 is reasonable. Then again, on the night before the trial, after a neutral mediator recommended that both parties settle for 225,000, both times McDonald's declined. So, trial was on. For 7 days, a jury saw and heard evidence and listened to expert and witness testimony. Going into the trial, Stella was already facing the same scrutiny that she would later receive from the general public. In fact, the jury foreman said he, quote, wasn't convinced as to why I needed to be there to settle a coffee spill, end quote, before the trial started. But this case did not go well for McDonald's almost immediately. McDonald's argued that Stella was at fault, or as they put it, she was the proximate cause of the injury by placing the coffee between her legs and not removing clothing immediately after the spill. Yes, I am not kidding. McDonald's argument is that the first thing a 79-year-old woman should be expected to do in public in her grandson's car when her legs are being scalded by boiling hot water that's soaking into her sweatpants is to get naked in front of her grandson, as well as everyone else at McDonald's, from the cramped passenger seat of a Ford Probe. And part of the injuries was her fault for not stripping in the parking lot. Again, assuming she had the physical capability to even do that. Then, McDonald's took it a step further, saying that her advanced age contributed to the severe nature of her burns because her old skin makes her more vulnerable to serious injuries. And somehow, that is her fault. Unfortunately for McDonald's, there is not a sign on the door, coffee cup, or menu that says anyone over the age of 78 should dine at their own risk. I once heard a law professor say that there are two types of plaintiffs you always settle with: babies and the elderly. Because those are the two kind of plaintiffs that always win, but the McDonald's attorneys clearly had not heard that advice. Of those 700 previously mentioned victims of McDonald's coffee burns, babies and children were also hurt. And in some cases, it was the McDonald's employee who accidentally spilled on a customer either in the store or through the drive-thru window. While initially the jurors were kind of on the fence prior to the trial, hearing that there were 700 known incidents of this happening in the past and McDonald's has done nothing is a hard number to ignore. One interesting fact that came up during the trial was that not all coffee shops feel the need to brew their coffee at 200 degrees to extract optimal coffee flavor. What a unique thought. You can just use lower temperatures. Part of McDonald's defense was, well, everyone else brews it that hot, so that's why we brew it that hot. But you can just use lower temperatures. Or here's an absolutely crazy idea. Maybe let the coffee cool or hold it for a second or do something before you hand it straight to them. They don't need to funnel it from the machine into their mouth. It can wait. A thermodynamics expert testified that liquids at 190 degrees Fahrenheit can cause third-degree burns in 2 to 3 seconds, and almost always require a skin graft procedure or debridement, the process where you have to remove all the damaged tissue from your dead skin. At 180 degrees, third-degree burns set in at 12 to 15 seconds, and at 160 degrees, 20 seconds. Stella, again, an almost 80-year-old woman, probably had 3 to 5 seconds to take off her pants while seated in a small car while probably wearing a seatbelt. That's if she does everything perfectly and optimally in the seconds that McDonald's said she should have reacted. Even then, at the temperature they were serving their coffee, it would still be too late. You know how when you have your coffee pot at home after the coffee's brewed, it's just kept hot on the burner? Well, on an at-home coffee pot, this is typically around 140 degrees. So if McDonald's had kept their coffee at the 140 degrees that a standard at-home coffee pot would, she would have had some time to react and respond, and the damage wouldn't have been as severe. Again, even if your argument is you need to brew it at that temperature, you don't have to serve it at that temperature. Instead, Stella's doctor testified that she incurred one of the worst scalding burns he'd ever seen. And through some pretty graphic photos, the jury saw proof. Reed Morgan had a McDonald's quality assurance manager take the stand. Chris Appleton, the very same quality assurance manager who testified 6 years prior in the Houston incident. Appleton was asked if, in the 6 years since the Houston lawsuit, McDonald's or anyone within the company had investigated the razor-thin window of time a person has to react to spills, given the temperatures they serve their coffee at. His answer, quote, "No, we have not." You know, for a fast food place who seems to always have their ice cream machine down, it's a shame that their grandma burning juice machine works just fine. Even after all those prior incidents, McDonald's refused to change its corporate policy and serve its coffee at a safer temperature. They said they are, quote, aware of the risk, with, quote, no plans to turn down the heat. Appleton also stated that there are more serious dangers in restaurants to worry about, which is a very stupid thing to say. Like, yeah, if the restaurant's fridge goes down, everyone gets food poisoning or something, or if there's like a contaminant in the food, you're right, that would be a bigger problem. That does not change the current problem of the super hot scalding thing you're serving to people that has burned 701 of them now. And also, are you implying that those problems are there? Are you saying like, oh, you guys think the coffee's bad? You've got no clue what's going on at most of these places. Even if there's other things you have to think about, you still have to think about the super hot liquid that you are encouraging people to put in their mouth. You physically cannot drink something served at that temperature without physically hurting yourself. And that's what the lawyers wanted to know. When asked if swallowing a cup of coffee brewed to the standards explicitly laid out in the McDonald's handbook is hazardous to the mouth, tongue, throat, and esophagus, Appleton's response was yes. If they could get the coffee in their throat, it would scald someone. Even though McDonald's knew its coffee was dangerous, their market research found that their customers want hot coffee, they want it steamy hot, and they expect to get it that way. Which, for one, see the commercial I showed earlier where all the coffee's like comedically hot. Again, they're happy to rely on that marketing when it makes them money, but in court not so much. But also, this is like comedically evil business strategy. A company is now being pinned for doing something reckless because it sells better, and then when asked why they did it, they just pass the blame off to nameless customers. Almost as to say, well, you people want it this way, and you keep buying it, so it's really your fault. McDonald's stance is, the customers know the risks they're taking when they drink coffee. But also, obviously not. Like, sure, people want hot coffee. I like hot coffee. This is hot. I like hot coffee. It's not 200 degrees hot, but it's hot. And a lot of people do stuff like they'll get their coffee and then they'll sit and eat their food and they'll let it cool for too long. And then by the time they drink it, it's kind of cool. So then they complain that the coffee should be hotter. Or maybe the cups are doing a bad job at insulating the heat so the coffee gets cooler than people expected. But none of those things are an excuse to give someone a drink that is just below boiling temp. No one should be handed a beverage that will cause, I cannot stress this enough, shock and third-degree burns. Imagine if I was bringing you food, and when I brought it to your table, the entire plate was on fire. And you're like, this is far too hot. And I'm like, yeah, but it won't be later. Another interesting thing from this trial is the revelation that McDonald's has something called a human factors engineer. And this person identified as a human factors engineer at the time, Dr. P. Robert Naff, took the stand and testified that McDonald's knew of the previous incidents and are aware of future incidents, which, for one, crazy statement. Not only are we aware of the things we've done wrong in the past, but we can assure you we will do it again in the future. But even after seeing the horrific photos of Stella's injuries, Naff took the stand and said these burns are, quote, statistically insignificant compared to the billions of cups of coffee they sell every year. You hear that, Grandma? You are a statistic improbability. This is not a matter of statistics. It's not like car wrecks, where the number of people who die in car accidents is so minor compared to the number of people that don't, that cars are still the most effective means of transportation. This is the product you are serving will burn people 100% of the time, and you're just banking on it not touching them for a few minutes after you hand it to them. Imagine if you went to a car lot, but if you got in the car within 10 minutes of purchasing it, the car will explode. So every car lot in the world has like a safe distance you can be upon buying it, because if you get too close to the car, you will die. That is a closer equivalency to the McDonald's thing. It would be like if car manufacturers said, yeah, well, the number of people that blow up in the first 10 minutes is statistically